Conference, Geronta Yeronimos, humanity, right? Monastic obedience versus obedience in the parish. So, you can start getting ready. There'll be a question and answer period after the talk as well. So, I don't know quite as much about Geronta Yeronimos, although he's fresh to our this side of the pond, as they say, right? So he came over from Greece just this week. He's been a monk for over 20 years and a priest for almost as long, and was the abbot of the monastery for quite a while after Bishop Geronta became a bishop. So again, we have. So again, we have a huge opportunity because hopefully, one of the things I've been encouraging people to do is to visit monasteries, right? But we don't always have the time or the energy to go visit a monastery, especially because there's not very many monasteries nearby, although there is the monastery in Framingham, St. Demetrios, with Father Sabati, the abbot. There's a Romanian monastery in New York. There's Roscoe. There's Jordanville. So there are some around, but it takes a while to get there, and we're all busy. So it's a really great opportunity also to have someone speaking to us about, from a monastic perspective, but also grew up, you didn't grow up a monk, I'm assuming, so he also knows about parish life, right? Father Yeronimos, and he can give us a little bit of clarification between monastic obedience versus obedience in the parish, which there are some distinctions. So it's a great opportunity, and we very much thank him for coming and making time to speak with us about this.
So as we said, the subject of my speech will be monastic obedience versus obedience in the word or in the parish or in the marriage, in the family. So as we all know, we often talk about obedience, or we hear other people using the word obedience. And St. Parish the Athonite, who was an example of obedience, says to each one of us, if you want to become part of God's holy plan and trust everything to God, throw away all your own plans and hang onto the back of your elder like a well-behaved child without kicking yourself or him. So I'm sure that when we analyze what St. Parish just said, we understand that obedience is one of the first prerequisites for obedience is to just basically surrender ourselves to God and to our spiritual father or our Geronta. And why do we have to do this? Because as St. Parish continues, we owe him, meaning our Geronta or our spiritual father, gratitude, since he is the one carrying us on his back to paradise. He is the one that he is carrying us on his back and is leading us to God. And more importantly, he is the one, to some extent, that he will answer to God for us. So, if we are able to understand the significance of our Geronta's task for our salvation and the tremendous responsibility he undertakes for the soul of his disciple, I suppose, don't you think that we should also give to our Geronta a hand and assist him in this task. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that it's not one man's job, as we used to say in Australia. Like our salvation, for our salvation, we should also be the one that we care for our salvation, and we shouldn't leave this only in our Geronta's hands to do it for us. So our Geronta, or our spiritual father, is the one that at times during our lifetime is struggling a lot so that we can reach out to God and we find salvation. And I'm just saying this because I'm sure you have experienced this, or well, I hope you haven't up until now, or you will never experience something like this, but at the end of the day we are humans. Sometimes when we find ourselves arguing with our spiritual father, or maybe argue is maybe a harsh word, disagreeing with our spiritual father, sometimes the tempter comes and says to us, oh, he doesn't understand me. Well, why does he want me to do this? Is this obedience? Oh, I'm just a lay person. Why do I have to be obedient the same way his monks or his other spiritual children are obedient to him? We do this without realizing it sometimes, but when we do this, we do not realize that it is as if we are going against what he is trying to do for us, what he is trying to build. With these thoughts, if we accept them, it is as if we are trying to destroy what he is building for us. I don't know if I make sense with what I'm saying. So, and the other thing that we have to point out on this is sometimes we are acting like small kids all the time, but the thing is that we are acting as if our spiritual father or our Geronta is our competitor, as if we have a competition. Who is going to be the right and who is going to be the wrong person? Who is going to, I don't know, justify themselves and who is going to not justify themselves? So, for us not to do this, we have to understand that for our salvation, we have to be together on this with our Geronta. And he has to be an ally for us and not our competitor or someone that all the time we have to argue in order to find the middle ground. If something like this happens, then as you can understand, obedience becomes very hard. And then we have to rethink who is the person that we have entrusted ourselves as our Geronta to guide us. And if such problems exist or continue, we also have to ask ourselves whether we have entrusted our Geronta enough and to such an extent so that he is allowed from us to work with us together for our own salvation. So the moment we are able to grasp the significance of obedience and its necessity for our spiritual life, only then will obedience, this is what St. Parish says, only then will obedience liberate us, because obedience is not slavery, as some people believe, but obedience is freedom, believe it or not. So why would we perceive obedience as freedom? Because obedience, if it is practiced in the right way, both from the spiritual child, but especially from the spiritual father point of view, then obedience will be able to free us from what things? First of all, from our own will, which, as we all know, is very strong. It is very strong. Whether we understand it or not, whether we have the opportunity to look inside us and dig deeper inside us and understand that our will is strong enough sometimes to prevent us from moving forward in the spiritual life and progress. But at the end of the day, our will is strong. This is the reality. And once we, as we said, understand the significance of obedience and that it is something that it is supposed to inspire us and give us freedom, then we'll stop slowly thinking that who is right and who is wrong, as I said before. And this has to do not only with our spiritual relationship with our Geronta or with our spiritual father, but this has to do also with the obedience which is being practiced even in marriage, in a family, or in the parish life. Obviously, obedience in a monastic settlement is totally different from the obedience which is practiced in the married life or in the parish, but some principles are common, are the same. So, through obedience, we receive some advice. Advice which most of the times has to do with our spiritual life. And this advice has one purpose. This is another thing that we have to remind ourselves. And this advice, the purpose of this advice is to direct us to God and prevent anything bad from happening to us. I'm emphasizing this because this is another topic and another trigger sometimes for arguments to start between ourselves and our spiritual father, or in the parish life between the parish priest, who is supposed to be and has to be the responsible person for the parish, and the people that are helping him. There can be no parish life without helpers, without people and volunteers that they are able to help the parish priest. When we were studying with Geronta in the university, we had a very good professor who was a very successful, and still is, a very successful spiritual father and priest, a family person. And he used to say to us when we had the subject of pastoral ministry, it was called Geronta, he used to say to us that a successful priest, we're talking now for the parish life, is someone who is not driving himself crazy and exhausting himself to do everything on his own, which is also something that is impossible, especially when the parish is growing and the demands of the parish are growing, and especially when this parish priest is also a family person and has his own family. So a successful priest is not someone who overtires himself to do everything on his own, but a successful priest is someone who knows how to allocate jobs, tasks, and knows how to liaise and projects, and is able to find good volunteers and helpers to assist him, because at the end of the day, progress and the outcome of projects and whether the parish is growing in numbers and in spirituality, it is not something that we are competing with each other, but it is something which is a common goal. And if a parish is going well, then everyone should be proud of this. The parish priest, the people that help, and all the rest of the people that are involved. So, giving advice and people trying to exercise obedience either in the monastic setting or in the parish life or even in marriage, which we are going to talk about later on. At the end of the day, it can never be something that is holding us back. We shouldn't perceive it in such a way, but we should perceive it as an opportunity for us to progress and work together. So obedience is a truly blessed, first of all, monastic virtue that may be applied, as we all have already said, at home to some extent, in the life of the parish, even at work, sometimes if the people are Christian, and in many other settings. So what is it required for us to become obedient and understand the true essence and the true importance and meaning of obedience? Definitely cutting off our will, as we said before. While practicing obedience, we should take advantage of every opportunity, of every temptation, of every scorn that we receive, and we do not like it, definitely, of every affliction, every difficulty we might face, every reaction that we are able to understand, if we are able to understand that it is happening inside us, and to be able to empty ourselves so that we can make space inside us for God. And if we make space inside us for God, then we'll be able to make space inside us for the people around us. Father Zacharias Zacharu, the Archimandrite, the very well-known Archimandrite from the monastery of St. John the Baptist in Essex, who was one of the disciples of St. Sophronius, and myself and Geronta, we had the opportunity to visit Geronta many times, because he was also visiting the monastery of St. Petra. He says in one of his talks, about a girl that she was his spiritual child, and she would go to him and confess to him. This is not a secret, he says this in one of his speeches. And this girl was going through a severe, very bad temptation at work, at her workplace. I think if I remember correctly, she was a doctor, and she was working at a very good medical practice, medical clinic. But for some reason, she had issues with her colleagues, to the point that she was devastated and she didn't know what to do. So she went to Father Zacharias many times, asking for advice how she would proceed with what she was going through. And at some point, Father Zacharias, after trying to advise her and comfort her, said to her, "You know what, from now on, during your prayer room, while you're praying, just pray along these lines. Ask God to help you understand the people around you. And to understand, if I remember correctly, what is the actual reason why all these problems are happening." So Father Zacharias did not try to justify her. He did try to comfort her, but at the same time he probably realized that her solution to the problem that she was going through had to come in a different way, from God. So she started praying like this. I think she prayed for quite a bit of time. And then one day, apparently, I think the supervisor or the person who was responsible for the clinic goes to her and says to her, "I don't know what's happening anymore, but there can be two things that are happening. You're either a different person from what you were when you first came here, or we have misjudged you, or we have treated you in the wrong way. So, this small example shows, first of all, that through obedience, miracles can happen. There is no doubt about this. Another thing is that sometimes when our Geronta or spiritual father says something to us, it is very hard for us to comprehend it sometimes, especially if we ask our logic to intervene. And another thing is, it's something which happens a lot in the monastic life, more than the other settings that we're talking about obedience. Somehow, even if you go to a priest who might be literate, old enough, might not know enough, as we say nowadays, about the everyday life, the world, his word has a volume, weight, and the spiritual relationship between a spiritual child and their elder is something which is established by God, is blessed by God, and as a result of this, God will always, almost always, with a mathematical accuracy, God will always bless the word of the Geronta or the spiritual father. And if sometimes the Geronta or the spiritual father does do a mistake, because we are not infallible, but when he also has good intention and he doesn't have like other things in his mind, meaning he is not trying to manipulate you, but he has good intention inside you when he gives you a piece of advice, then most of the time, so if not all the time, God will always bless his word. And even if he says something that it is not 100% accurate or right, it is then through your obedience, our obedience, that God blesses not what Geronta has said, which might be wrong once in a while, but blesses the outcome of the whole situation. And I'm saying this obviously not because I want to present ourselves as, or any spiritual father, or any Geronta or Gerontissa as infallible. I'm saying this because if you practice obedience, and I'm sure from your own personal experiences, if you practice genuine and real obedience, I'm sure that you have come across such instances that things that your spiritual father has said to you, you doubted them, but then because of obedience, you went ahead and you did what he said, and then all of a sudden you realized that his word was what you were supposed to do. Obedience requires also something else, philotomy. Philotomy is another word that we talk about often. I don't know how often we practice it, whether we understand the true meaning behind philotomy anymore, at least anymore. Apparently there is no an explanation, there is no the equal word when you try and translate it in English. I'm not sure about the other languages. The way I view it, and maybe Geronta and Father John as well, maybe can also give their opinion, and Father Christo. The way I view it is basically when you are trying to be a philotimo person, you see how we say it in Greek, αυτός ο άνθρωπος είναι φιλότιμος, έχει φιλότιμο. This person has φιλότιμο, he is a φιλότιμο person. The way I perceive it is, you try and do everything you can to empty yourself, to make yourself available to serve others, And this comes out of an exceedingly large amount of love that you have inside you for the rest of the people, and you don't care whether you prove right or wrong, you don't care whether you are going to do more things than what the other people do, you don't care if you are going to exhaust yourself, but the only thing you care about is for the rest of the people to be well, to be happy, and to basically for you to be the best person in the world. So the fathers, as true monastics, were eager and were quick to offer themselves as a sacrifice to God, for their elder, for their brothers, and for the whole world. So philotimo requires also self-sacrifice. I was reading the other day a small story, a small excerpt, I think it is from the book of Papa Haralabos Dionysiakis. Elder Haralabos was one of the disciples of Saint Joseph the Hesychast, and he was a fellow ascetic with all the very well-known elders of Saint Joseph the Hesychast, Elder Ephraim from Arizona, Elder Yosef from Vatopedi, and all the rest of the brotherhood. So apparently, when Papa Haralabos, Elder Haralabos, when they, after the passing of Saint Joseph the Hesychast, the elders, the different elders, his disciples, stayed at different cells. This had happened even from before Saint Joseph the Hesychast had passed away, because Saint Joseph realized that from all these people, monasticism would flourish. So he gave them freedom to be able to create on their own brotherhoods, because he also was their Geronta, and he could understand and he could realize that they were also different, although they had the same spirit. So when Papa Haralabos was in his own cell with his own small brotherhood, apparently they had finished a whole day full of work and chores. They had a paginia where everyone gathers together to do their tasks in the monastery. This is what paginia means. And when the fathers were just about to go and rest a bit because they were exhausted, a loud horning came from the port, and it was the horning of a loud sound from the boat, from the captain, saying to them that he had brought a huge barrel of olive oil for them. And when Papa Haralabos heard this noise, he said to himself, "Oh, the Blessed One," it's what we say in Greek, eυλογημένος. This time he thought of bringing the olive oil, now that all the fathers are tired. And how are they going to, after all this tiredness, this hard day they're going to bring the barrel of olive oil where we are? Because it wasn't easy for them. There were steps, and someone had to carry it on his back. So Papa Haralabos, who was a very discerning elder, he did not even dare to order or ask anyone of the disciples, and just he had the authority, the spiritual authority, but he didn't dare to ask them, "You go and do this," although someone had to do it, because he felt so sorry for them, although he knew that someone had to do it. We are talking about philotimo, that's why I'm saying this story. And then one of the brothers realized that he had to do something and help his Geronta. So he volunteers himself and he says to him, "Geronta, give me your blessing and pray for me, and don't worry about anything. I will just go down on the port, I will just put the barrel on my back. Even though I'm tired, and I will come up and everything is going to be okay. Mind you that when we are talking about monastic cells on Mount Athos, I'm saying this because I didn't have the opportunity to live in a monastic cell on Mount Athos. I don't think I would be able to make it, but in August, I had the opportunity to go to Mount Athos and stay for a few days there. And then for the feast of the Dormition of Our Lady the Theotokos, I was sent to a small cell which was at the seat of Agia Anna. I don't know if anyone of you have visited. For me, it was my first time. And we went there with another father from the monastery of Simonopedra, and we had to climb some 1,700 steps to go from the port to the monastic cell. I couldn't believe the number, and I said to the father, come on, I think they are over-exaggerating. 1,700 steps. From the port up until now, we've just done 1,700 steps. But when we were coming down the next day, one of the fathers said to me, of course it is, because when you go down, like we were going, it was easier for us, although we were tired from the all-night vigil the day before, but we would go just 2 or 3 steps, like we would just go down quicker because we wanted to catch the boat as well. So we were doing this as we were going down, and the steps would not finish. They were uncountable. So as we were going upwards, but I'm saying this because we had with us a small, what the monks have on Mount Athos, it's called a tagari, or in my area, in my island, they call it saclera. It's like a woolen bag, and we were carrying up some small things that we had, so in order to spend our night there. So it was, I don't know, 2 or 3 kilos, maybe 5 kilos. By the end, when we reached the cell, which was not the peak was 2,000 steps. The cell was further down, so it was easier for us to go. We were tired, at least myself. The other father was okay, was still going. Myself, I was tired. And the father told me, because I was telling him every now and then, Father, will just make us stop to sit down because I won't make it. and the father was telling me, he said to me, you know, Father, in the old days, when they would do the translation of the relics of the fathers, the old fathers on Mount Athos, the ones that they had the task to carry all the load, the olive oil, the candles, everything they had, all the provisions from the port, all the way up to the high-up cells especially, their shoulder blades, the relics of their shoulder blades, they were given a special aroma, fragrance, myrophrysa, because on these shoulder blades for years, the fathers, they were carrying all these items out of obedience and out of philotimy and self-sacrifice for their fellow ascetics. So obedience does require philotimy and self-sacrifice. Now, obedience, as we said, it is very important. Along with obedience, there is something else which is also very important. And this is what the old people used to say in Greece. Να έχεις την ευχή των γονιών σου. Να έχεις την ευχή του πατέρα σου ή της μητέρας σου ή του πνευματικού σου. What the old people used to say, it is good for you to have the blessing of your father, or your mother, of your elder. This is something which is a blessing also from God, and it's something that you carry with you, and is of great help for you. So, this is something which is important in the monastic life, but it is also important in the family. It is so important to teach our children to know how to be obedient to their parents. I sometimes say to the younger ones, learn to be obedient from a younger age. Because when you grow older, you will have to be obedient to someone anyway. You won't escape this. If you decide to become a monastic, you will have to be obedient to your Geronta or your Gerontisa. Actually, it's not that you will have to, but there is no other way for you to reach out to God. And if you are to get married, you will have to be obedient either to your wife or to your husband to some extent. Because if you are not obedient to each other, there is no common ground between each other. And on this, I will have to share something personal. It's not something like something that someone would hear and would say, oh, wow, it's such a nice story, but for me it is so important. I remember when I was growing older and in my late teen years, I was trying to find out what I'm going to do after I finish high school. And for some reason I was influenced as well by my teachers or some people. Anyway, I was thinking of becoming a civil engineer. I know. Like, you can only laugh about it, but anyway. I had no idea about mathematics, physics, chemistry, a bit, but not much. So, after year 10 and 11, I said to myself, how are you going to make it? but I just needed a push, something there, someone to tell you, what are you doing? Like, wake up and just try and do something that is for you. Maybe it was also my character that I would take time to make a decision anyway. Although later on when I had to make a decision, thank God I did make a decision quick, in a quicker way. So, what happened was one day, I remember, in our school there was a strike. Our teachers had a strike. These are things that they happened a lot in Greece, and back then even more. We're talking about the late 90s. And I was just sitting there at the lounge with my dad and my mom. And my dad says to me, what do you want to study? And I said to him, well, I'm thinking of a civil engineer or something like this. And he said to me, well, those things are not for you. Simple as that. These things are not for you. And another time, he also intervened as well, because after I made my mind up to change the direction, the last years of high school, and choose different subjects, I couldn't register, and I wanted to become a prosecutor. What was I thinking? Anyway, I thought that I would serve the world. Anyway, when my dad heard about this, he said to me, you're a prosecutor. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, but going back to the first discussion, he said to me, go into something that is something that you love, something that it's going to fill you up, it's going to give you purpose, so that you're able to use everything you have, but direct them on a good direction for you. I can tell you that this was probably after meeting my Geronta, but I'm saying this because without this advice, I wouldn't be able to meet my Geronta if I was to take a totally different direction in my studies. Because as Geronta said, I met him while on our first day of our studies. So I can tell you that this piece of advice coming from a person who had only finished primary school was the most significant advice in my life. And someone would say, and did you have to follow his advice? No, I didn't have to. They were not, actually my parents, they were not the type of people that they would just tell you something and then you would have to be forced to follow it and do it. But their philotimo and their sacrifice and their love all these years, up until this day, would make you be obedient to them without them putting pressure on you to be obedient to them. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. Their example. And so, it is good for us to learn to be obedient from a young age, even to our parents, even to people that we think that, well, they do not know a lot and we know better. At the end, God blesses even this type of obedience as the precursor, is this how you call it, for something larger, something higher that is going to happen later on in your life. Now, with obedience, because sometimes we as monastics or clergy, I don't know, maybe we do this subconsciously. When we talk about obedience, monastic virtues, sometimes we catch ourselves sugarcoating everything and presenting everything like in a beautiful and nice way. Although, as you all know, Christian life in general and the monastic life for us that we have experienced it to some extent is not easy. It's not a road which is full of rose petals and you just step on it the same way you do when you have just gotten married. From the first, sometimes second problems and challenges arise in front of you, which is nothing wrong with this. Otherwise you can't grow spiritually and mentally and psychologically. So obedience does not guarantee that our journey is always going to be easy. This is a misconception. And this is a misconception that a lot of people also have for the church. We're talking now for the life in the parish. Some people, for example, find themselves returning back to God, returning to the church, practicing their faith for a bit of time, and then they go to the spiritual father and say to him, nothing has changed. All my problems remain the same. So what is this that I have gained with myself going closer to God? Nothing. And who said that our relationship with God is a financial agreement or account or transaction? Or this is what St. Parish used to say. I don't know if you remember this. He used to say, but what is this that some people think? Is it like you have 200 drachmas and you go to the grocery store and you buy 5 kilos of potatoes and he gives you the change? And he used to say also that for God and in the spiritual life there are mathematic equations. See, that's why it's good that I didn't study to become a civil engineer. Anyway, these things that you just said, sometimes they do not apply. St. Parish used to say that in the spiritual life, 5 plus 5 does not equal always 10. Or it might be 1 plus 1, 1,000. Meaning, like, if you have the zeal, the purpose inside you, the obedience, the grace of God, miracles can happen, not because of you, but because of the blessing you receive also from your Geronta. So, and we should remind ourselves that the level of difficulty for whatever we are undertaking, whatever this might be, does not always determine whether what we are doing is right or wrong. Does it make sense with my poor English? Meaning, let's say, for example, that you want to go and study medicine. Okay. And the first year of your studies, you find it hard. And you realize that you have to study hard. Otherwise, how are you going to make it? To get your degree and your whatever is the practice, so that after 20 years you're able to practice anyway, something like this. So finding it hard in the first year or the second year or the third year, what does it mean? That you are not to become a good doctor? Like, if you have the skills and if your heart is there, you can do it. So the level of difficulty for what you have chosen can never determine whether your decision was right or wrong, at least at the beginning, right from the beginning. If then, along the way, anyway, you find difficulties and other things, you can always, as Geronta said, go back to your spiritual father and discuss about it. But the same applies for the spiritual things, the advice that sometimes we receive from our spiritual father. On this, we also have to mention something else. Obedience can perform miracles and can produce a lot of fruit, but it also depends on how much faith we have on our Geronta's word and piece of advice that gives us. So, if you go to your Geronta and you ask for something, your Geronta says something specific, and then inside you, you say to yourself, how does he know now? And how can he come up with such an advice? Or because of obedience, I will have to go and do it, but inside me, I can tell you that I don't believe it's going to happen. Well, if you don't believe that what you're going to do is actually going to happen, and if you don't have faith and trust on your Geronta's words, how is this going to have a good outcome? It cannot. So we also have to have faith in order to practice obedience in the right way. Elder Yeronimos of blessed memory also talks about this, I think in the book of Nipsis, of watchfulness. And he even goes further and he says, even if you practice obedience and the outcome of a specific task that your Geronta has asked you to do might not be the favorable one, still this has nothing to do with you. This is another thing that we can't comprehend. It's a misconception. So if you are told to do something and you just go and do it with all your heart, even if it doesn't succeed, this doesn't mean that your obedience was done as a waste. Does this make sense what I'm saying? This also applies in the parish life. We cannot always be successful with any project we are undertaking. We are humans. We can put things together, we can discuss, we can make decisions. At the end of the day, when we put these things into practice, we realize that we were wrong, as Geronta said. And what is wrong to be wrong? You just realize that you were wrong, but then don't start becoming like a Greek person and going and ordering a t-shirt which says, I told you so, and just to go and you word in front of the people that they were wrong, and they gave you a wrong advice, because this is not Christian. And in Perth, that we stayed with Geronta for 15 years, one of the ladies that she was the wife of one of the 3 donors of the property which were upon which the monastery of St. John was built. These people were coming from Castellorizo, and it's good to mention this because it's also something nice, a Geronta for the memory, because these people, they helped us a lot and they were the kindest people that you could ever meet. So the wife of one of the donors, she knew Italian because in Castellorizo they were under all the Decanese, They were under the Italian occupation up until 1948, 47 something. So they had occupation for more than 400 years, comparing to the other the part of Greece. So they used to come to the monastery, and because they were involved for years, but they were the kindest people in the community. Right? And you know what happens when you are involved in the community. Right? She used to say to us that the Italians had a saying, 4 Greeks, 5 minds. 4 Έλληνες, 5 μυαλά. Meaning like we, sometimes we are the ones that we make things harder than what they are. And we are not humble enough to accept our mistakes or that something went wrong and take upon ourselves the responsibility, but not only the responsibility that it is your responsibility. How about if you also take the responsibility of the other person? Or at least if you have decided as a group something, take the responsibility as a group of something that went wrong. There is nothing wrong with this. Because if a group of people, a committee, a family, a monastery, a brotherhood, a sisterhood, any organization at the end of the day, if they act and work together as one body, even if they make mistakes, they will always progress. They will always move forward because they do not allow external problems. The internal ones can be sorted out if they are in agreement. If they do not allow external problems and issues to come inside and just divide everything and create issues, problems. Yes, I think we have exceeded for a few minutes the time that I was supposed to talk. I hope that through your questions I might have the opportunity just to also share with you a few other things that I have written inside here. Yes, obedience is such a, I don't know, an important virtue for us to apply and understand. And I hope that with the grace of God and with the help of our spiritual father, or our Geronta, our parish priest, our parents, our friends, our family members at work, I hope that we will all be able to apply it more, because believe me, the outcome is worth all the work that we put towards it.
Okay, thank you very much, Geronta Yeronimos. I think we'll take a little bit of a break, 5 or 10 minute, maybe even 15-minute break. But please write your questions, and then we'll have a question and answer period after that. Thank you very much.